The second I saw the Dean's Honor Scholarship prompt, I knew the Tulane admissions team wanted me to think outside of the box. But when I took a closer look at the physical medium for this prompt, the white sheet of paper, I knew that I could do more than just think outside of the box. I wanted to make my own box. Paper is one of those things that we all interact with pretty much every day, and me picking up the Dean's Honor prompt is just one example of such interaction. I believe that, ironically, as a result of its ubiquity, a lot of people have really lost their connection with paper. In such a disposable society, it's really easy to not think twice about the effort and innovation that went into such a seemingly simple object. For this project, I wanted to reclaim my connection to paper by crafting a sheet myself, no matter how difficult. Papermaking has been independently developed by multiple cultures throughout history, although it was first innovated in ancient China in the 1st or 2nd century BCE. The traditional story is that a statesman named Tulane discovered the process in 105 CE, but researchers now believe that he merely made the process more efficient. Either way, the first step in papermaking is gathering the necessary raw materials. Paper is made out of plant fibers, and the ancient Chinese found that hemp, mulberry trees, and bamboo had the best fibers, but any plant should work fine, so I just went to a nearby forest and collected some tree branches. Now that I had collected my raw materials, I started breaking up the branches into much smaller pieces so that I could soak them in water for a couple of nights. This process is called retting, and it readies the fibers for harvesting as well as weakening them to produce higher quality paper. Ideally, this is done in open water so that bacteria can enter the system and start fermentation. In fact, this process was so crucial to Renaissance European papermaking that some mills would have a dedicated retting expert who would have as much specialized knowledge in his craft as the village winemaker would have in his.
Soaking the branches made the fibers come off super easily. So they just, they separate right off from the bark and everything. So it's just the inside of the bark pretty much. But as you can see, it just came right off, and this is these long stringy bits. And these are what are actually going to hopefully eventually turn into paper.
It's easy to use something so commonplace as paper without pondering its initial discovery. The ancient Chinese likely got the inspiration for paper making by accident by leaving fibers from rags on a wet mat. When the water drained out and the fibers dried, they found a precursor to paper. It follows that the first actual paper was made by pounding rags and stirring them in water. After I collected what looked like enough fibers, I proceeded to cook them in an alkaline solution of sodium carbonate and water. This is supposed to help chemically break down the fibers and remove non-cellulose material, and although it wasn't completely necessary to the process that I was using, I thought it would be helpful just to make sure that any tougher fibers got broken down. I already touched upon how paper was first invented in ancient China, but on the other side of the globe, the Mayans also invented paper as early as the 5th century CE. Unfortunately, as a result of the same conquest and imperialism that erased millennia of culture and innovations from the civilizations that used to call the Americas home, only the partial remnants of 4 out of the thousands of codices produced by the Maya survive. A lot of the information on Mayan papermaking that we have today is from a handful of researchers who lived among modern indigenous tribes descended from the Maya and learned the craft of papermaking from them. This, to me, shows the power of preserving culture. We only have this valuable historical knowledge because generation after generation dared to pass on tradition in the face of oppression. With the fibers cooked, now I had to beat them into a pulp which I could cast into a sheet of paper. I could already feel the fibers binding together, giving me hope that this lump would, in fact, turn into paper. After laborious hours of beating and chopping, I finally had the penultimate product, a pulp that dries into paper. However, I quickly encountered a setback. When I spread the pulp in my mold, I found that there wasn't enough to make a whole sheet of paper. After all the time spent meticulously stripping the bark of those tree branches to get the small amounts of fiber underneath, I'll admit that I was a little discouraged to find that I hadn't gathered enough. But after all that work done up to this point, I wasn't about to give up. If they can make thousands of sheets of paper in ancient China, then certainly I can make just one. So after another round of stripping fibers, cooking them, and mashing them, I finally had my pulp. At last, I had reached the step of using the pulp to form a sheet of paper. This final task consisted of pouring the pulp into a mold I'd made out of 2 picture frames with a layer of mesh in between, and drying the shaped pulp overnight. Renaissance European mills would have 3 men in different roles doing this to produce as much paper as possible, and modern day mills have millions of dollars of equipment and hundreds of employees to produce paper at stunning efficiency. I only had myself to scrap together a single sheet. As I commenced these final steps, I reflected upon the individuality, intimacy, and intentionality of the process. The next day, I of course exercised the utmost care and thoughtfulness in taking my paper off the towel. Having known and cared for this sheet its entire life, from tree to paper, I was motivated not only by an interest in completing this project, but also by a sense of responsibility for the paper's well-being. Unlike the 400 million metric tons of paper produced worldwide per year, this sheet of paper was completely and utterly mine, and I had to show it respect. I take the pristine, blank white box on the Dean's Honor Prompt to represent the modern convenience and disposability of our society. Like so much of what we consume daily without a second thought, this white box is anonymous. Anyone with a printer can make one completely identical. My brown box, though filled with imperfections, has character. It has a history. Every brown speck shows a crumb of bark that reveals its natural origins and human conception. Making this paper box forced me to think outside of society's conventions, and showed me the connection of the natural world innate in everything we consume daily. After all, what even is thinking outside the box, if not creating your own?